Tehran, Iran. A political tremor rippled across Iran today as President Masoud Pezeshkian made a rare and candid admission. His government lacks the ability to enforce the country's mandatory hijab laws. The statement, delivered with unusual bluntness, has stunned observers both inside and outside Iran, raising profound questions about the future of one of the Islamic Republic's most contentious social policies. For decades, Iran's hijab laws have stood as a symbol of the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Women have been required by law to cover their hair and wear loose clothing, framed as adherents to Islamic values under Sharia law. Enforcement has traditionally come through morality police patrols, fines, arrests, and, in some cases, public humiliation. Yet, despite these harsh measures, resistance has grown steadily, often visible in small but powerful acts of defiance. Women wearing colourful headscarves draped loosely, form-fitting coats, or in some cases removing their hijabs altogether in public. Now, with Pezeshkian's words, the debate has reached an inflection point. Speaking in a moment that has already begun reverberating across international media, he declared, Masoud Pezeshkian, some experts had the same idea to enforce the hijab law, but I did not have the capability or comprehensive ability to enforce it. It was my understanding that if I do this, a conflict would arise in the country that I cannot handle, and I'm not going to do anything that would cause tension in the country. Those remarks, described by analysts as extraordinary for an Iranian president, challenge not just the feasibility of strict enforcement, but the very principle of state control over women's dress. In a country where public dissent is often dangerous, Pezeshkian's decision to openly admit his government's limits is, in itself, an act that could reshape Iran's political landscape. Pezeshkian, widely regarded as a political moderate, framed his comments carefully. He did not denounce the hijab as a religious value, nor did he dismiss its importance in his personal life. Instead, he emphasized that his objection lies with coercion, not belief. Masoud Pezeshkian: I personally believe in the hijab and everyone in my family wears the chador, but that does not mean that someone who does not wear chador is not virtuous. I mean, this is a belief that I live with. In these words, Pezeshkian revealed the tension between private faith and public governance. His stance acknowledges hijab as a matter of personal choice rather than state enforcement, a line that has long been rejected by Iran's ruling hardliners. To some, it was an olive branch to reform-minded citizens. To others, a signal of weakness that could embolden social disobedience. The mandatory hijab law has always carried political weight far heavier than fabric alone. It became one of the first measures introduced after the 1979 revolution, embedding the state's authority into the daily lives of women. Enforcement was never merely about clothing. It was about loyalty, obedience, and control. But resistance has been equally enduring. Over the years, women in Tehran, Shiraz, Isfahan, and other cities have pushed boundaries in subtle yet defiant ways. Hairstyles peaked from under headscarves, makeup became more expressive, and coats grew shorter and tighter. Each act, though small, chipped away at the image of total compliance that authorities sought to project. The stakes escalated in September 2022 when 22-year-old Mahsa Amini was arrested for allegedly wearing her hijab improperly. Her death in police custody ignited the largest wave of protests Iran had seen in decades. Women tore off their hijabs, set them on fire in the streets, and marched under the now global chant, "Women, life, freedom." The crackdown was swift and brutal, hundreds killed, thousands arrested, but the spark of defiance refused to die out. That uprising has haunted Iran's leadership ever since. Every policy discussion about hijab now carries echoes of Amini's name and the fury her death unleashed. Against that backdrop, Pezeshkian's admission seems even more remarkable, an acknowledgement, perhaps, that the state no longer has the moral authority nor the practical machinery to impose what millions reject. What happens next remains uncertain. For reformists, Pezeshkian's comments are a potential turning point, an opening to press for broader freedoms. For conservatives, however, they represent a dangerous concession that could unravel the ideological foundation of the Islamic Republic. Hardliners have long argued that the hijab is non-negotiable, a pillar of Islamic law and national identity. They view enforcement not as a choice, but as a duty. Any retreat, in their eyes, signals weakness, emboldening women to push further and potentially destabilizing the regime. Yet the president's words echo the sentiment of many ordinary Iranians, especially younger generations. To them, hijab laws are less about faith and more about repression, a reminder that personal freedoms remain hostage to political orthodoxy. By admitting the impossibility of strict enforcement, Pezeshkian may be aligning himself with a demographic that has already moved on from the state's cultural mandates. The risks for him, however, are enormous. In Iran's tightly controlled system, presidents operate under the watchful eye of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and the powerful clerical establishment. Openly suggesting limits to state authority could invite sharp rebukes or worse, political isolation. The Iranian people themselves may prove to be the decisive force. Despite ongoing risks of fines, arrests, or even violence, women continue to appear in public without hijabs. Videos circulate online of bareheaded women walking through shopping malls, boarding buses, or attending universities, acts that were unthinkable a decade ago. Activists have also coordinated symbolic protests. On National Day of Hijab and Chastity, many women deliberately went without head coverings, transforming an official day of state propaganda into a moment of mass defiance. For them, every outing without a hijab is an act of protest, quiet, persistent, and deeply political. This steady defiance suggests that society is already moving beyond the control of the state. Pezeshkian's comments may simply be catching up to a reality already visible on Iran's streets. The state can no longer dictate dress without igniting unrest. The president's remarks also resonate far beyond Iran's borders. Women's rights organizations, Western governments, and global media outlets have seized on his words as a sign of possible reform. At a time when Iran faces isolation over its nuclear program, its regional policies, and its human rights record, even symbolic shifts carry international significance. Yet the world has also seen false dawns before. Reformist rhetoric in Iran has often raised hopes, only to be crushed by hardline backlash. Skeptics warn that Pezeshkian's words, though courageous, may amount to little more than political theatre if not followed by legislative or institutional changes. The hijab law, after all, remains on the books. The question now is whether this moment marks the beginning of gradual reform or merely a fleeting gesture. Iran stands at a crossroads, one path toward opening space for individual freedoms, another toward doubling down on repression. The reality is that change in Iran has always been contested, moving in cycles of protest and crackdown, reformist promises and conservative retrenchments. But the persistence of women's resistance, now spanning generations, suggests that the demand for choice will not vanish. Pezeshkian's admission has cracked the door open. Whether that door widens into genuine reform or slams shut under hardline pressure remains to be seen. What is certain is that the debate over the hijab has transcended clothing. It has become a debate about power, who holds it, how it is exercised, and whether the people can reclaim it in the most personal of spaces, the right to choose how they live. Tonight, Iranians and the world are left with questions. Will President Masoud Pezeshkian's words trigger a broader rethinking of state control? Will the hardliners move to reassert their grip? Or will Iranian women, through their daily defiance, continue to force the state to adapt to realities on the ground? The hijab law may still stand in statute books, but in practice its power is fading. In the quiet courage of women who step into the streets unveiled, and in the rare honesty of a president who admits the state's limits, the struggle over freedom in Iran enters a new chapter. As Pezeshkian himself admitted, enforcing hijab laws risks igniting a conflict too great to control. Perhaps for Iran, that realization is the first step toward a different future. Stay tuned. This is not the end of the story.